My narrative starts long before I really knew what it meant to be thrown aside by people you should most trust. Emily, my mother, brought me when she was barely 20. Jeremy, my biological father, fled as soon as he realized she was pregnant and never wanted children. She informed me they had only been together for a few months and that she didn't even bother requesting child support following a nasty split. He objected anyhow, and they never spoke again. Fortunately, my grandparents intervened. Her rock. They helped her land a steady job and got her through school. Growing up, I watched her fight through challenges and respected her will. She dated here and there, but until Harry arrived, nothing particularly noteworthy. They dated for 3 years before getting married. He was a coworker and a nice enough man who started to show up regularly when I was 8 years old. Though not precisely close, Harry and I got along fine. Though it always felt as though I was in the way, we coexisted amiably. Things changed when Mom became pregnant once again, 4 years into their marriage. Everything that had appeared reasonable changed when Mom had twins, Caleb and Grace. Mom's focus now turned entirely to Harry and the twins. At first, I considered it simply the anarchy of having babies living in the house. Though I tried to remain encouraging and even made extra efforts to assist whenever I could, nothing I did seemed sufficient. Our distance apart widened like a canyon. She grew up far away, then frigid. 6 months after the twins were born, they brought me down for a serious conversation. I had just turned 16, and will never forget the frigid tone in her voice when she informed me they couldn't afford to keep me in the family anymore. She claimed their money was extremely limited given the twins. Though she didn't say specifically that I was being kicked out, the message was clear. I wasn't welcome. I promised to work part-time to help demonstrate to them I could lighten the financial load. Mom shook her head to discount my attempts. She advised they prioritize the kids who deserved it, earned it. That word made me go weak. I understood then that staying was not an option. They obviously wanted me gone. Feeling unwelcome and without anywhere else to go, I packed and headed for my grandparents' place. Though they cut ties with Mom, they greeted me with wide arms. They loved the twins and wanted not to lose that relationship. Although I could see their logic, it hurts to see them still support her. I worked part-time while still in high school to help my grandparents reduce their load. Knowing I would be needing money for education, I worked as much as I could and saved. Mom and Harry hardly paid my grandparents visits, but when they did, they never asked about me. It seemed as though I had disappeared. Mom was totally uninvolved when the time came for college. I would get brief looks of them with the twins, happy and carefree, and it ached to see how little my absence appeared to affect them. Because my grandparents couldn't, I had to co-sign my college loan using a nice uncle. To survive, I took several jobs. I paid living expenses, tuition, and set aside savings wherever I could. Not even to wish me well, Mom and Harry never contacted me. I had to embrace it. First, life beyond college was a struggle. I managed debt, groceries, and rent while living paycheck to pay. I ascended the ladder at work gradually, getting promotions and finally a senior management post. By 33, I was doing nicely for myself. I shared with just a small number of individuals my success, keeping it secret. One of them was my uncle. The same one co-signed my loans. During a family get-together, he mentioned it to my mother and expressed pride in me. That's when things started to spin out of control. One day, Emily and Harry showed up at my door totally without warning. They were barred on every platform, and I hadn't seen them since college. Curious, I opened the door expecting they would wish to heal relationships. Rather, they wanted something else totally. They gave me a quick congratulations on my accomplishment before delving into their financial problems. Their company had failed, they stated, and they were having financial difficulties. Now 17, the twins needed aid as they were getting ready for college. They didn't ask. They insisted that I cover my siblings' tuition as though it were my obligation. I was shocked. How could they approach me asking this? Years ago, they made it abundantly evident that I belonged not to their family. I reminded them of this and of how they had turned away from me when most needed. Harry bristled, saying it was time for me to let go of the past and act like an adult. Mom joined in. claiming I owed it to her for everything she had given to raise me. Sacrifices? She had shoved me aside just as it suited her. I requested them to go and told them rather precisely that I was not paying anything. They took it poorly, charging me with being unappreciative and self-serving. Saying they had done what was best for the family, they argued I had no right to harbor resentment. It was gaslighting at its best. I requested they go once more, this time threatening to contact the police. They left, but before Mom cried out that I would regret this choice. I felt both relief and resentment as I shut the door. Their boldness was incredible. The door closed, and for a second, I just remained still, staring down the ground. My hands still trembled, half from astonishment and half from rage. They had arrived unannounced into my house and insisted on money for siblings I hardly knew. It resembled certain twisted fever dreams. Trying to make sense of it, I kept running over the chat in my thoughts. One thing was abundantly evident, though, regardless of how I cut it. They still saw me as family. That evening, I had trouble sleeping. I was a backup plan, a bank account. I tried to drive it out of my head, but the things they said stayed stench-inducing. The most poignant comments Mom spoke about all the sacrifices she had made for me were, "She raised me alone for some time, sure, but wasn't it exactly her job? Parents are meant to do exactly what? I asked not to be born, yet she behaved as though I owed her some sort of bill." The following day, I contacted my uncle, the co-signed student loan borrower. When I informed him what had transpired, he became embarrassed. He had not known of their financial difficulties, and most definitely did not anticipate them to arrive at my house. "I thought maybe they just wanted to congratulate you," he replied. His voice weighed with regret. I told him I didn't blame him, but I also made it plain that sharing my personal life with them wasn't acceptable. I didn't anticipate they would do something like this. "I have years of trying to separate myself from all of that," I said to him. He sincerely apologized. "I could tell he felt horrible even though you might have meant well, and it wasn't your business to bring me up to them." I couldn't stay enraged at him in spite of everything. Ultimately, he was the reason I had been able to initially afford to attend college. Should someone have earned my pardon, it was him. Mom had different ideas, so I tried to move on in the next few days. She began emailing me long, guilt-tripping notes on how much she had done for me and how disappointed she felt in my lack of thanks. I discounted them at first, but they persisted. She seemed on a mission to wear me down, and at last I broke. I sent her one email back, clearly laying everything out. She and Harry felt I wasn't worth their resources, so I told her how much it had hurt to be thrown aside, and how hard I had struggled to live. Her answer was precisely what I expected. I reminded her that I owed her nothing now, and that, even when I was struggling, I had never begged for anything from her. She termed me callous, self-serving, and unappreciative. "This is how you pay me for all I have done for you?" she typed. I banned her email after that, but naturally she continued. She started anew after opening a fresh email account. She even turned up at my workplace. Thank God I missed that day. Still, the receptionist called to inform me she was not leaving. I made it plain that I would sue her for harassment should she ever pull something like that once again when they handed her the phone. The saddest aspect of all of this was realizing I had let myself believe, even for a moment, that she would come to apologize. That appeared to scare her off for the moment. Maybe they were coming to atone, a small part of me had thought when they first arrived at my door. Perhaps they have shifted, but conversations with them made it very evident they hadn't. By now, I was tired. They wanted something from me. They were not remorseful for what they had done. It was taxing between the emails, the surprise visits, and the ongoing worry. It was time, I thought, to see a lawyer. Though I had no idea if her actions would be sufficient to obtain a restraining order, I had to investigate my alternatives. I couldn't keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder. Then, a few days later, things changed I never saw coming. One evening, I got home late and discovered her waiting outside my apartment. The instant I saw her, my tummy fell. Before she started screaming, accusing me for every single mistake in her life, I never even got a chance to unlock my door. She charged me with destroying her marriage, of turning the family against her, of being a selfish, unappreciative daughter. I tried to be cool as it seemed as though she had been storing all this in for years, and now it was finally leaking in the most ugly manner. I advised her to leave, and I said I didn't want to fight. She surged at me instead of backing off, though. I was standing there with my keys in hand second. Then, I dropped to the ground and my phone skidded across the road. It was so bizarre that for a time I simply stopped. She was shouting, striking me, trying to scratch at my face like a crazy animal. But then instinct took hold. I shoved her off me, grabbing her wrists. I was defending myself, not wanting to hurt her. However, I was stronger than she was, and it wasn't difficult to overwhelm her. The noise must have attracted the notice of several of my neighbors, who came rushing to assist. They held her back as another person phoned the police. She screamed non-stop, fighting against their hold like a madwoman. When the cops showed up, I decided to file charges. Though at that moment I thought I had no other option, I did not want to. This was about shielding myself from someone who obviously had no boundaries, not about me anymore. I felt a weird mix of feelings as they hauled her away: wrath, solace, grief. I basically felt fatigued most of all. I knew things would only get uglier from here, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let her dominate my life anymore. The days after Mom's tantrum felt like a fog. Her screaming, the neighbors dragging her off me, the flash of red and blue lights. I kept running back over the scenario in my thoughts. It seemed unreal. Part of me thought that by bringing accusations, I had acted morally. The other bit is, I battled guilt. This was my mom, regardless of what she had done. Then I would remind myself, she was not behaving like a mother, not for years. That first night, I was trying to organize my ideas. I slept hardly, and the next morning I realized I had to act. I explained everything that had happened when phoning my attorney. He was not sparing in his remarks. As long as she has access to you, you are not safe, he advised. It's time to get a restraining order. Hearing it presented that way hit strongly. Dangerous? I never considered it in such terms. Still, he was accurate. This went beyond her merely showing up at my door and writing obnoxious emails. She had actually attacked me physically. How far she will travel going forward was unknown. It was time for me to defend myself. Although the application for the restraining order took time, it was vital. Along with the police report, I offered remarks from my neighbors who had seen everything that evening. Although my attorney reassured me I had a good case, it felt strange to be suing my own mother. Meanwhile, the family started to learn of what had happened. My grandparents gave me calls, their voices weighted with worry. Though none of her behavior was their responsibility, they nonetheless apologized for her and reassured me I had done the right thing. Grandpa pointed out, she needs help. Real aid. She cannot have that either. They were not mistaken. Mom's life was disintegrating and there was nothing I could do to put it right. My grandparents say Harry moved out after taking the twins. Apparently they had fought fiercely following her arrest and he had at last had enough. Hearing that felt unusual. He advised her she needed to straighten her act before he even thought about returning. I felt sorry for Caleb and Grace on one hand. They neither sought for any of this. On the other side, I felt justified as well. Harry had backed her choices for years, kicking me out and cutting me off. Now he was dealing with the consequences of helping her. That was ironic in a sense. Mom, of course, saw it differently. She held me entirely responsible for everything. Her incarceration, her marriage failing, her financial difficulties, all my responsibility, she said. She was unrelenting. She even slipped handwritten letters under my door in spite of police advice. Every one of them was full of the same guilt-tripping nonsense. How I had destroyed her life, how I owed her, how lazy I was. I threw them all away. At work, I tried to keep things normal but found it difficult. One day, worried about the situation Mom had turned up at the office caused, my employer drew me aside. "We will have to act if this happens once more," she remarked gently. I reassured her I was managing it, but it was embarrassing. Not against you, but rather to safeguard the workplace. After working so hard to establish a professional reputation, my personal life was leaking into my work. 2 weeks later, the restraining order arrived. Though not a whole fix, it was a weight off my shoulders. Mom would not accept it lying down, I knew. Sure enough, she tested the limits a few days after the item was delivered. One evening, I arrived home from work and discovered her car parked at the curb. She was close enough to make her point, even though she wasn't formally on my land. I got out of my car not. I instead waited after phoning the cops. It stung, even though I knew Mom was trying to control me. They escorted her away when they got here, but before she threw more insults my way, claiming I was a horrible son and that I would regret this. This was not the mother I knew from my early years, the one who would tuck me in at night and support me at school functions. As the restraining order events stacked up, I began to consider my next moves. That mother had vanished years ago, replaced by someone spiteful and selfish who saw me as an impediment rather than her kid. Moving to a different house, someplace more secure and farther away from her, was advised by my attorney. Though a major choice, one that made sense. At the same time, I couldn't get rid of the sense that this wasn't over. I had worked hard to reach where I was and wasn't about to let her ruin that. Mom was frantic, not only hurling out wrath. Her marriage was on the rocks, her company collapsed, and even now her parents were beginning to distance themselves. She was spinning, and I knew I was her scapegoat. I would find myself wondering in the calm times, when the wrath passed, whether there was anything I could have done differently. Then, though, I would recall the years of silence, the rejection, the way she had turned her back on me without thinking twice. She had decided to double down every time. The next step was obvious. I had to cut relations entirely after giving her chance after chance to put things right. There is no more hoping she will change. There is no benefit of the doubt. As I started looking for a new place to live, I felt a weird sense of closure, since she was no longer my concern, and I was not going to let her pull me down with her. I neglected what she wanted or thought of me for the first time in years. This was about me, my life, my tranquility, my future. I had spent so long trying to show I was worth love, seeking her acceptance. Now, though, I now understood I was not in need of her love or approval. Mom had always told me I wasn't good enough. I had established a life without her and was glad of it. But standing in my apartment packing boxes for a fresh start, I realized at last the truth. I was more than enough. And I always had been. Moving out was emotionally as much as physically demanding. Organizing my life into boxes seemed significant, as if I were packing the past as well. I had spent so much time trying to create something solid, something safe, and I was leaving it behind. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. That area stung the most. I discovered a spot in a quieter neighborhood with greater security on the other side of town. Though it lacked flair compared to my own flat, it was safe, which was what I needed. My attorney advised changing my contact number completely and installing cameras. It felt terrible, but at this point I wasn't taking chances. The day the move came swiftly. Wanting everything done all at once to prevent any unplanned mom visits, I hired a moving company. I started to feel depressed as I watched the movers pack my stuff. My haven, where I had created a life on my own terms, this flat had become. But I told myself that relocating was a new beginning rather than a loss. The first night in the new location was shockingly silent. There are no known creaks in the flooring and no sounds of neighbors through the thin walls. Just silence. It should have been consoling, but instead it seemed disturbing, like the quiet before a storm. Something I never felt the need to do previously. I double-checked the locks before bed. The next morning, I woke up to texts from my grandparents flooding me. Harry had told them that he had formally moved out of the house carrying the twins. Mom was spinning even more, he said, lashing out at everyone around her. Hearing that made me feel for Caleb and Grace. She blamed him for not supporting her enough, blamed me for wrecking her life, even blamed the twins for being ungrateful teenagers. These were young people caught in the crossfire of a mess they did not produce. We had hardly communicated since I left all those years ago, so I knew them very little. But they did not merit this. As much I informed my grandparents, and they agreed. Grandma responded, "We're trying to be there for them, but your mother isn't making it easy." It served as a reminder of just how much anarchy Mom had brought into everyone's life. She was dragging down everyone who got too close, not only injuring me. I began to realize for the first time that my choice to exclude her went beyond merely self-defense. It was about ending the cycle and refusing to allow her negative conduct define me. Naturally, Mom wasn't ready to let go. I received a call from my attorney 1 week following relocation. Once more, she had broken the restraining order. She had arrived up to my previous flat this time, pounding on the door and insisting on seeing me. It was taxing when the new tenant said she no longer lived there and refused to leave until the police arrived. Although I wanted to think she would give up finally, it became more evident with every fresh episode she would not. She lived on anarchy, on creating drama and assigning herself the victim role. The distance was the one bright spot. Even if I detested to admit it, part of me questioned if she would ever stop. Living in a new area relieved me of concern about her showing up unannounced. Knowing I had acted to safeguard myself, I could at last breathe a little more easily. Still, the emotional toll persisted. My gut constricted every time my phone chimed or a car slowed by my house. One evening, while I was sorting, I came onto an old photo book buried in one of the crates. It was from my early years, when Mom and I were simply one other. Pictures of us at the park baking cookies in the kitchen, even one of her helping me with homework, abound. I let myself to recall those days when she was my entire universe and I was hers, but the comfort of those memories was fleeting, because years of suffering accompanied every great moment on that album. The times she pushed me aside, the choice she made for Harry and the twins over me, the years of silence. That was the way things stood. Closing the album and sliding it onto a high shelf, out of sight, life began to feel normal once more, or as normal as it could have under the circumstances. I plunged myself into work, catching up on projects I had put off throughout the upheaval. My colleagues observed a shift in me. One even asked whether I was okay. I didn't know how to respond. Though the reality was more nuanced, I wanted to answer, yes, I'm fine. Though not exactly, I was okay. Though it wasn't easy, I was healing. One evening, Caleb called me out of the blue. Having not seen him in years, hearing his voice surprised me. He sounded almost guilty and anxious. I wanted to say thanks, he added softly. Grandma told me you stood up to Mom. Though I'm not sure how you did it, I'm grateful someone did. His remarks really touched me more than I anticipated. Though it made sense, I had not considered how all of this was impacting Grace and him. It couldn't have been easy. They were living the version of Mom I had fled. I apologize to him for you going through this. If you ever need anything, just call. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step forward. I felt, for the first time in a long time, that perhaps out of this mess, something worthwhile would arise. As I hung off the phone, I knew maybe I could not cure Mom, but I could be there for Caleb and Grace in a way she lacked. This went beyond simply survival now. It was about creating something more robust and better. Caleb's call stuck with me, for myself as well as perhaps for the ones still dear. Though only a few phrases, it opened something inside of me. For so long, I had categorized him and Grace under Harry and Mom, part of a family I was not allowed to belong to. Still, those decisions were made by others, not including them. After that conversation, I found myself thinking about them more frequently. Back then, they were only children attempting to negotiate the aftermath of a life they did not ask for. Now, they were still young people. Now Mom was whirling and Harry had departed. What was life like for them? Were they in good condition? Did their sense of abandonment match mine at their age? Though I wanted to not overreach, the idea tormented me. Caleb had been in touch once, but it did not indicate he wanted me involved. I left the door open nevertheless. Should either of them ever need me, I would be there. Meanwhile, living in my new house gradually began to feel normal, or at least normal enough. For the first time in weeks, I started sleeping through the night once the cameras and additional protection brought some peace of mind. Work was my anchor, a place where I would bury myself in deadlines and projects. My colleagues also saw my change. One of them even said, "You're smiling more lately." What transpired? Have you run across the lottery? I shrugged it off, but the truth was simpler. Since everything was flawless, I was not smiling. I was smiling since I felt in charge of my life for the first time in a very long time. Mom's disarray was not controlling my every thought anymore, and that was worth celebrating. One afternoon, my grandparents called me. Their tones were tense. Before they even spoke, I sensed something was wrong. Drunk and hostile, Mom had walked up at their place asking where I lived. She erupted, accusing them of siding with me and deserting her when they refused to tell her. Usually the calmest person I know, my grandfather acknowledged he had to physically take her out. "She's not well," Grandma remarked softly. Hearing it crushed my heart. We have no idea what to do anymore. They were elderly, already coping with personal medical problems, and now they were being pulled into her mess. I felt a surge of shame, as though by challenging Mom, I had somehow made life more difficult for them. I did, however, also know it was not my fault. Mom was the one making these decisions. She had been doing so long before I chose to cut ties. I asked them whether they wanted me to visit, but they replied no. "We'll handle it," Grandpa answered resolutely. "You concentrate on looking after yourself." Still, I couldn't get rid of the impression that things were becoming worse. Mom's conduct was becoming more random, more desperate, and I had no idea what her next action would be. My attorney advised increasing the security levels in my house and maintaining a notebook recording any such instances. Although I agreed, it felt like overkill. A few days later, Caleb phoned once more. Better safe than sorry. His voice changed this time. It was shaky and almost breaking. "She is getting worse," he remarked. "Harry's gone for good. Grace hardly wants to go home anymore. She remains with friends as much as she can." I had no idea what to say. I apologized, but it seemed empty. Sorry wasn't enough to clean up the mess Mom had made. "It's not your fault," he said fast. "I just have no idea what to do. She won't pay attention to anyone, and I cannot look after her alone. I'm young." Hearing him say that really hit me. In many respects, he was living the same life I had at his age, trying to keep everything together while feeling like the world was disintegrating, sounding so confused, so overwhelmed. Only this time lacked a means of escape. "Caleb," I continued following a pause, "you don't have to take care of her. Your work is not in that area. She is the parent, not you." He did not reply straight away, and I could hear him sniffling on the other side. He remarked at last, "I'm not sure if I can leave her. She's still my mom. I get it," I said to him. "But you cannot put yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Should it become excessive, you can come to see me, you and Grace both." He thanked me, his voice hardly audible above a whisper, and we hung up the conversation. Long afterward, I stayed seated there staring at my phone. I started to feel accountable for them for the first time, not out of obligation, but rather because I wanted them to avoid going through what I had. Though it was not from her, they deserved better. Over the following week, I saw Caleb a couple more times. Though it was obvious things at home hadn't changed, he sounded a little better every time. Grace remained far off, but that was not surprising. She was at a time when independence was her escape, and I couldn't blame her for wanting to keep her distance from the family drama. Regarding Mom, I never heard from her personally, but the quiet was disturbing. She was still angry, according to my grandparents, and she was still trying to get everyone who would listen sympathetic. Her circle of supporters was, however, getting smaller. Watching her life fall apart from a distance was mixed. People were beginning to see through her facade, and she had less choices, and less people to blame. Part of me wanted to reach out to give her one final opportunity to right things, but the logical side of me realized wouldn't matter. She wasn't ready to change, and maybe never would be. I wasn't furious about it for the first time. I was not very depressed either. I just felt done. This was the life she decided upon. This as well. This was mine. Weird is the sensation of being done. It comes not all at once. It gradually seeps in until one day you find the weight you have been carrying absent. Mom felt that way as well. Caleb's call and the quiet that followed marked the end of my anticipation for the next explosion. I ceased to be braced for hit. I allowed myself believe it may be finished for the first time in years. Life became calmer, but not magically simpler. The kind of silence that allows you breathing room and mental space. I put myself into arranging my new house and into my job. It was about creating something felt like not only about rearranging furniture or decorating. Caleb checked in every now and then, little calls or texts just to say hello. I could at last feel comfortable here. Grace remained silent, which I took as understanding. I was not going to prod her. She was negotiating her own path through the clutter. Still, I made sure Caleb understood the door was always open to both of them. About Mom, the silence persisted. I wanted them to know they had options even though they didn't need them right now. She was still in a terrible state, according to my grandparents, but she ceased inquiring about me. I had no idea whether that was from stubborn pride or resignation. In either case, it was welcome. She could blame me all she wanted, but I would not be playing the part she had written for me anymore. I stopped being the villain in her narrative a few weeks later. My lawyer contacted me. Everything was perfect when he completed the last of the restraining order documentation. "She cannot approach you without grave consequences," he remarked. Hearing it felt like a turning point, a last step in recovering my life. But even with that protection, I couldn't overlook the knock-on consequences Mom had left behind. I couldn't get rid of the impression that Caleb and Grace deserved more than the cards they had been given while they were still mired in the rubble. I then began searching for unobtrusive ways to assist, so as not to put strain on them. I asked my grandparents if they needed anything for the children. They first hesitated, most likely out of pride, but finally they acknowledged things were tight. Mom had burned through a lot of family goodwill, and people were less ready to support her now. It began little, but I offered to throw in where I could. Not for her, but for them. A little extra for groceries using a gift card, and some additional funds for school supplies. I never brought it up with Caleb or Grace, hence, it was not a big concern. I wanted them to see themselves as not owing anything to me. It has nothing to do with that. Over time, Caleb began opening up more. It was about providing them the support I hoped someone else had given me at their age. He would phone to whine about Grace, who he said was beginning to push him away, about his friends, about his school. One evening, he informed me she behaved as though she had no interest in anything, but I am sure she does. She is simply afraid. I could relate to him. "Sometimes acting like you don't care is simpler," I said. He was silent for a time before responding. "You're not like that. That way it doesn't hurt as much. You care." His straightforward language startled me. He was right. I had not considered it like that before. About Grace, about him, even about Mom in a cold, detached manner, I cared. Still, caring did not mean I had to allow them to re-enter my life. It just meant that, as months went by, things began to settle down, and I was choosing to approach life differently than Mom ever had. After graduating from high school, Caleb and Grace both gave me calls to let me know he had been admitted to a nearby community college. He responded, almost regretfully, "It's not much." I told him, "It's everything." Grace, on the other hand, followed a different road and is doing fantastic. Shortly after graduation, she moved in with friends and worked odd jobs to pay for her expenses. She avoided everyone, even me, but Caleb claimed she was doing okay. For now, that was plenty. Mom? She vanished still more into the background. She was trying to keep her life together when Harry filed for divorce, according to what I learned from the family grapevine. Though I wanted to be sad for her, part of me was unable to. She had taken decisions and turned down every chance for a different course. You have to stop blaming the world for your issues and start assuming responsibility at some point. For me, life continued on. She was not yet present and perhaps never will be. Work was consistent. My house felt like home, and I even began dating once more, a little wary step into something I had avoided for a long period. One night, as I sat on my porch watching the sun set beyond the horizon, I considered all that had brought me to this point, even if it was just small. Though it was still there, the suffering, the rejection, the wrath, it did not consume me anymore. It had evolved into a component of my narrative, but it was not the complete story. Not anymore. I had been preoccupied for so long with what I had lost. Her love, a solid family, the childhood I felt I deserved. But nowadays, I now paid close attention to what I had produced. My life was that which I knew. I could see a future ahead of me. Caleb contacted me that evening simply to chat. I realized something as I listened to him babble about his classes and new friends. I had not simply survived. I had evolved. In my younger years, I had become the person I needed, and that was plenty. Mom's tale did not define mine. One page at a time, I was writing my own right now, and was first thrilled to see where it would lead. Years had passed.